The static hissed through the old television, a relic from the 1970s that should have stopped working decades ago. Thomas Whitmore sat cross-legged on the dusty wooden floor, staring at the flickering screen. The antique store owner had warned him, practically begged him, not to buy it. But Thomas was drawn to the device, fascinated by the eerie hum that seemed to resonate from deep within its circuits. It felt alive. He told himself it was just an old TV, a piece of forgotten technology. But as he connected it to the power outlet, the screen lit up on its own. No input, no antenna, just an endless looping broadcast. At first, it was grainy black and white image, barely distinguishable. Then shapes emerged. A hallway, dimly lit, a door slightly ajar, a figure standing just outside the frame. The camera angle was static, like old analog horror tapes Thomas had watched online. Distorted, unnerving. But something about this felt different. It wasn't just a recording. It was real. The scene shifted abruptly, glitching like corrupted footage, and the screen filled with something new. A face, not human. Hollow eyes, stretched skin, its mouth moving as if whispering directly to him. A deep voice crackled through the old speakers, layered beneath the static. "You see it now, don't you?" The words sent an unnatural chill through Thomas's spine. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a pre-recorded tape. Something was speaking to him. He fumbled for the power switch, but the knob refused to turn. His hands trembled as he yanked the cord from the wall. The screen flickered, but the image remained. He scrambled backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. "This is just interference," he muttered, though he didn't believe it. The broadcast changed again. A timestamp in the corner read 3:33 a.m., though his phone said it was barely 9 p.m. A shadow moved in the hallway of the footage. It took a slow, deliberate step toward the door. The room Thomas sat in, his living room, looked eerily similar to the one in the footage. Same wooden floor, same dim lamp in the corner. His breathing grew shallow as realization set in. The video wasn't showing some random location. It was showing his home. His phone vibrated violently on the floor, lighting up with an unknown number. The moment he picked it up, the same distorted voice from the TV whispered, "Turn around." The air thickened, his limbs frozen in place. Slowly, he turned his head toward the doorway leading to his kitchen. It was empty. At least it seemed that way. But something about the darkness beyond felt wrong, as if it had depth, a pool, like staring into an abyss that shouldn't exist. The television screen went black for a moment before a new image appeared. It was Thomas, sitting exactly where he was, in real time, except behind him, in the doorway, stood a figure, tall, distorted, its movements twitching like corrupted footage, skipping frames. The analog horror aesthetic wasn't just something he was watching. It was bleeding into reality. The static rose to a deafening screech as the screen glitched again, the figure lunging forward, closer. The timestamp changed. 3:34 a.m. And then everything went dark. Thomas woke up sprawled on the floor, his body stiff and cold. The television was off, the screen reflecting only his own wide-eyed expression. His head pounded, as if something had crawled into his skull and nested there overnight. He scrambled to his feet, checking his phone. 3:34 a.m. The same time meant from the footage, the same time the figure had appeared. But that wasn't possible. Had he blacked out for 6 hours? Or had time simply stopped? His breath was shallow as he glanced toward the doorway. It was empty, yet the air still carried the same unnatural weight, as if something had lingered long after the screen went dark. He told himself, he imagined it, that he'd been watching too many analog horror tapes, that his mind had tricked him into seeing patterns and static. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Something had been there. Maybe it still was. Determined to make sense of it all, he turned back to the TV. His fingers hesitated over the power button. He didn't want to see that face again, that stretched skin and hollow stare. But he needed to know. With a deep breath, he flipped the switch. The screen blinked to life, static. Then slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't the hallway this time. It was a bedroom. His bedroom. The sheets on the bed were rumpled exactly as he had left them, the closet door slightly ajar. A new timestamp appeared. 3:36 a.m. A whisper crackled from the speakers. "Don't look away." Thomas felt his pulse thunder in his ears. The closet door in the footage creaked open an inch. He turned his head toward his actual bedroom down the hall, his hands shaking. He could see the door from here, and it was moving. The old wood groaned as it drifted open, inch by inch. His breath hitched, the TV screen glitched, and for a fraction of a second, he saw it. Something standing inside his closet, buried in shadow, its limbs jerking unnaturally like corrupted footage, skipping frames. His instinct screamed at him to run, to leave the apartment, to burn the cursed TV, and never look back. But his body refused to move. The screen flickered, and suddenly, the figure wasn't in the closet anymore. It was closer, standing by the foot of the bed. Thomas gasped. No. No. His phone rang again, that same unknown number. With shaking hands, he lifted it to his ear, but there was no voice this time. Just breathing. Slow, ragged breathing. As if something was trying to mimic the sound of a person, but getting it wrong. Then the whisper came through. "You invited me in." The call disconnected. His heart hammered in his chest. He wasn't alone. He could feel it now, standing just beyond his vision, hiding where the darkness ran deepest. The television screen flickered again, showing his own reflection in the glass. But something was wrong. His reflection wasn't moving like he was. It was staring straight at him, smiling. And then, ever so slowly, the mouth of the reflection opened, stretching wider than it should have been able to. The lights in the apartment flickered. A deep vibrating hum filled the air. The TV screen cut to black, and behind him, something whispered his name. Thomas didn't turn around. Every fiber of his being told him not to. If he turned, he would see it. And if he saw it, it would see him. His breath came in short, frantic bursts, his skin slick with sweat. The room was silent now, but that silence was wrong. Too heavy, too expectant, as if something unseen was holding its breath with him. The television screen flickered again, casting jittery shadows on the walls. The image had changed. The footage now showed his living room from an angle that wasn't possible. It was being filmed from inside the apartment, from somewhere above him, as if an unseen camera was floating just out of reach. The timestamp read 3:38 a.m. and then movement. A shadow peeled itself from the corner of the screen, its form glitching, stuttering like corrupted footage struggling to render. It had no clear shape, only a suggestion of limbs, an outline that flickered in and out of existence. But the face, oh God, the face, was still grinning, hollow eyes locked onto the screen, onto him. "You're part of the signal now." The voice crackled through the speakers. Thomas staggered backward, his heel catching on the rug. He crashed to the floor, gasping, eyes darting between the TV and the darkness behind him. It was getting closer, wasn't it? He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. The air was growing colder, the shadows stretching longer. His phone buzzed violently against the floor. Another unknown number. His trembling fingers swiped at the screen. This time, he didn't wait to hear the whisper. He screamed into the receiver. "What do you want from me?" Silence. Then, the voice, more distorted than before, layered with static and something else, something ancient, something wrong. "The signal does not end." The line went dead. A sound like tearing fabric filled the room, and Thomas's gaze snapped back to the television. The screen was warping, the image distorting, as if something was pressing against the other side of the glass. The shape of a hand, long and skeletal, pushed forward, stretching the barrier between its world and his. The static grew louder, rising to a high-pitched shriek. The hand broke through. Not through the screen, through reality itself. The air rippled like a disturbed frequency, and the thing from the broadcast began to crawl through, its form unraveling and reassembling in jittering frames, like a corrupted analog horror tape manifesting in real time. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, filled with a void that seemed to hum with unseen voices. Thomas scrambled to his feet. He had to get out. He had to. The lights cut out. The only illumination left came from the television, casting that distorted figure in sharp relief against the walls. It moved with unnatural speed, flickering from one position to another, never truly walking, just skipping forward, closer, closer. A final whisper crackled through the air. "You were watching. Now it watches back." The screen blinked off, and something breathed right next to his ear. Thomas ran. His body moved on pure instinct, his legs nearly buckling as he bolted for the door. The air behind him crackled with static, the very fabric of reality warping as something unnatural tried to pull itself fully into this world. His fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, shaking so violently that he nearly missed the lock. A cold, stuttering breath touched the back of his neck. He twisted the knob, yanked the door open, and threw himself into the hallway. The apartment building was eerily silent. No distant hum of televisions, no muffled sounds of neighbors, just an oppressive stillness that felt wrong, as if the world had been put on pause, waiting to see what would happen next. He sprinted down the hallway, but the overhead lights flickered wildly, casting everything in erratic flashes. The shadows between the strobes seemed to stretch, move, watch. He reached the stairwell and took the steps two at a time, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. But the sound wasn't just his own pulse. No, it was something else. The low, wobbling hum of an old transmission. The signal does not end. The words weren't spoken aloud, yet they echoed inside his head, vibrating through his bones. His vision swam as the stairwell walls warped, flickering like distorted VHS footage. The further he ran, the more the world around him glitched. The railings twisted, breaking apart and reforming in impossible shapes. The concrete steps cracked beneath his feet, but the pieces didn't fall. They just floated, suspended in an unnatural still frame. And then the stairwell ended. Not at the ground floor, not at another hallway. It just ended. A jagged, pixelated void stretched before him. A space where reality should have continued but simply stopped, as if someone had cut the footage of existence itself. The blackness pulsed, humming with broken whispers, numbers, static-filled screams. Thomas staggered backward, his breath ragged. He turned, and the figure was there, flickering, watching, grinning, its hollow eyes locked onto his. And for the first time, Thomas understood. This wasn't just some haunted television. It wasn't a ghost. It was the signal itself. A broadcast that had been forgotten, abandoned in the airwaves, lost in the frequencies of dead channels, but it had never truly stopped. It had just been waiting. And Thomas had tuned in. The figure reached for him, its elongated fingers twitching like corrupted frames struggling to stay in sync. The closer it got, the more his body locked up, his muscles stiffening as if his very existence was being compressed into a single frame, frozen, trapped in an endless loop of analog horror. His phone vibrated one last time. With the last ounce of control he had, he forced his gaze down. The screen was on, showing a live video feed, his own camera. But the footage wasn't just of him. It was of everything. The stairwell, the void, the figure. The broadcast had expanded. He wasn't just a viewer anymore. He was part of the transmission. The last thing he saw before the static consumed him was his own face on the phone screen. His mouth stretching into a hollow, grinning void. Then, signal lost.